Quarantine curfew lifted this morning with 25 police jurisdictions declared isolated. Except for employees of essential services, people restricted from entering or leaving isolated areas. Public transport service returned to normalcy. Traders of Manning Market inconvenienced due to restrictions. Joe Biden pushes forward with plans for office.
Good afternoon. You're watching Lunchtime News on TV1. Those were your headlines. On to a more comprehensive look of those stories and more. The quarantine curfew imposed within the Western Province was lifted at 5 a.m. this morning. However, according to the Government Information Department, several areas have been declared as isolated areas across the country still.
12 police divisions in the Colombo district have been declared as isolated areas. They are namely the police divisions of Mattakuliya, Mutwal, Blue Mendel, Kutahena, Grand Pass, Foreshore, Adurupu Street, Maligawatha, Dematagoda, Vellampitiya, Kiselwatha and Borella. Police divisions of Vattala, Paliyagoda, Kadawatha, Ragama, Nigambu, Pamunugama, Jayala and Sapugaskanda police divisions in the Gampaha district have also been declared as isolated areas. The Government Information Department said several areas in the Kaluthura district such as Horana, Ingiriya and Wakada West Grama Seva divisions have been declared as isolated areas. Mavanalla and Ruwanwala police divisions in the Kegalle district have been declared as isolated areas as well. Kurunagala city limits and the Kuliyapita police division have also been named as isolated area. Meanwhile, it has been identified there is a high risk of the virus spreading in several housing complexes in Colombo. The Government Information Department informs the occupants living in those establishments to limit mobility and to stay indoors as much as they can. These housing complexes are identified as Metsanda Sevana, Mihijaya Sevana, Ranmini Sevana in Mutwal, Sirisanda Uyana in Dematagoda, NHS complex in Maligawatha. Government Information Department said that no one can enter or exit the isolated areas.
Meanwhile, the 35th death due to COVID-19 in Sri Lanka was reported last night.
The deceased was a 78-year-old male. According to the Government Information Department, the deceased had died due to a heart-related ailment he suffered with COVID-19. Meanwhile, 510 close contacts from the Paliyagoda cluster were identified as positive for the virus. With that, the total number of cases reported from the Paliyagoda and Minuwangoda clusters has increased to 10,447. The total number of COVID-19 cases in the country has increased to 13,929. On a more positive note, 562 people have recovered from the virus yesterday. With that, the total tally of recoveries in the country rose to 8,285. 5,609 people are currently receiving treatment under medical supervision for the virus. Chief Epidemiologist at the Epidemiology Unit of the Ministry of Health, Specialist Dr. Sudhas Samravira, said that people should adhere to health guidelines even though quarantine curfew has been lifted.
Traders who arrived in the Manning Market in Colombo this morning were inconvenienced when they were not allowed to enter the market premises.
Farmers were requested to bring their produce to the Manning Market in Petta once the curfew was lifted. Accordingly, farmers from Vellavaya, Nuwara, Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa transported their produce to the market this morning. However, the farmers were not allowed to pass the technical junction in Maradana to arrive at the market. Police directed the lorries towards the Narahempita Economic Centre. Although officials from the Manning Market arrived at the premises, the police did not allow the farmers to sell their produce at the market. We brought in the products that were ordered by the Manning Market. But how are we going to sell these at the Narahempita Economic Centre? Thereafter, the farmers sold their produce along the Singharaja Mavatha in Colombo and at the technical junction in Maradana.
With the lifting of the quarantine curfew, public transport services will resume normal operations from today.
SLTB and private buses operated in areas where the curfew has been lifted without stopping in isolated areas along the respective routes. However, traffic congestion was not reported in these areas. Only 2 buses operated from the Gampaha town today. Our correspondent said private buses did not operate from the Gampaha area. With the lifting of the curfew, activities in all areas except isolated areas in the Western Province resumed as usual today. Accordingly, those employed in the public and private sectors must report to work today. However, the Ministry of Public Service, Provincial Council and local government said state institutions should only call in the required number of staff from tomorrow. Agency heads should determine the minimum number of staff who are to be called for work, and other staff members should work from home. Meanwhile, the Railways Department has made arrangements to deploy 136 office trains to transport passengers reporting to work. Railways Department said all train services must adhere to health guidelines. Those who utilize privately rented vehicles will also have to follow the recommended health guidelines. Meanwhile, shops including supermarkets will also be open in areas where the curfew is lifted while adhering to health guidelines.
Taking a look at the political landscape in the country, Samagi Jana Balavega convened a media briefing in Colombo yesterday, and following are some of the views that were expressed at the event.
All the port trade unions objected to selling the East Container Terminal to India. Now news has spread that it has been sold to India in secrecy, amidst previous incidents of selling army camps to Shangri-La and selling 50 acres of the Colombo port to China, that this government is now attempting to sell the East Container Terminal to India. For 5 months, not a single PCR machine has been brought to the country. Not a single ventilator has been brought to the country. If there is a massive surge in COVID-19 cases, there will be no beds left for the patients. What the government is doing at the moment is that they are not providing what is needed to the people, but they have deployed people across the country to spread false rumors to the people. You cannot eradicate the virus by dropping pots into rivers. They are feeding some ridiculous things to the people every day. What did the previous government do? They launched an investigation and handed over the avant-garde back to the Navy, and the profits was flowing to the National Treasury. What did the present government do? They gave this to one of their friends. Is that fair? At the moment, the present rule in this country is a ruthless and a stubborn one.
සාධාරණයි සම්පූර්ණ නීතියට පඩහැනේ තක්කඩි පාලනයක් මේ රටේ තියෙන්නේ.
US President-elect Joe Biden needs to make tackling the COVID-19 pandemic his top priority following his win over Donald Trump in this year's US election.
Even many public health experts who celebrated President-elect Biden's win turned their immediate focus to the crisis it might create. The health authorities fear of the 10-week transitional period until Biden takes office, during which COVID-19 cases and deaths skyrocket, and the outgoing Trump administration doesn't take additional action to stop the surge. Health officials have long warned of a devastating winter, and case totals and deaths have spiked just as millions of Americans are set to congregate with their families over the holidays. Experts say that President Trump's persistent downplaying of the crisis will continue to have deadly consequences, and as a result leave Biden to inherit a country experiencing its worst COVID-19 crisis. Announcing the first steps in transition plan, his team said there would be more testing and Americans would be asked to wear face masks. He is also to focus on the economy, tackling racism and climate change. Trump has yet to concede, and Biden's win remains a projection as key states are still counting votes. President Donald Trump's inner circle is beginning to split over his ongoing refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election, as Jared Kushner and First Lady Melania Trump advised him to come to terms with President-elect Joe Biden's victory, and his adult sons pressed him and allies to keep fighting. Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, has approached him to concede. The First Lady, according to a separate source familiar with the conversations, has privately said the time has come for him to accept the election loss.
Keeping up with the international political landscape, Myanmar citizens turned out to cast their votes yesterday in the country's second general election since the end of military-backed rule, with the leader Aung San Suu Kyi widely expected to win another term.
More than 37 million voters are registered to vote, but fear over the spread of COVID-19 may dampen turnout. Voters arrived at polling stations before polls opened at 6 in the morning Myanmar time to form long queues by following social distancing of Myanmar's health ministry. Poll authorities and volunteers said it was difficult to socially distance hundreds of people, but were optimistic about getting polling done peacefully. In the biggest city, Yangon, polling station officials were seen counting ballot papers after polls closed at 4 p.m. Myanmar time. Preliminary results were expected to be announced later in the day. Leader Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy is expected to win a second term following a 2015 landslide that ended more than a half a century of military and military-backed rule. She has the support of a population that largely sees her as a heroine of democracy for her struggle against dictatorship, although her win will likely be narrower than the victory that propelled her to power. Supporters of Myanmar's ruling party reveled into the night after a general election seen as a referendum on the fledgling democratic government that remains popular at home. NLD candidate To Win urged supporters to celebrate the results without breaching COVID-19 restrictions. However, supporters defied COVID-19 restrictions to celebrate the early result from local poll stations.
Minister of Sports Namal Rajapaksa inspected the Dorayappa Stadium in Jaffna this morning.
Minister Namal Rajapaksa engaged in exercises during the visit. Several dignitaries, including the State Minister Tenuka Vidanagamage, MP Angajan Ramanathan, Mayor of Jaffna Emmanuel Arnold, and national netball player Tarjani Sivalingam were also present.
The Dorayappa Stadium is a centre for sports development in the northern province. We are hoping to develop the stadium with the facilities required for football. In order to bring up a football league in Sri Lanka on an international scale, Jaffna will have to be transformed into a centre for that. Within the next 4 years, we are hoping to build synthetic tracks in 6 lanes. We are holding discussions regarding that right now. We are hoping to build centres or outdoor gyms in Jaffna and in nearby islands.
Delhi Capitals have qualified for the final of this year's Indian Premier League after defeating Sunrisers Hyderabad by 17 runs.